my agency does. The criteria that are needed to be met in order for something to make the National Register are things like maybe something important happened there, maybe someone important lived there. This is Bill Clinton's birth home. Artifacts can be found there. Or architecture. A lot of times architecture plays a role in whether or not a structure will be on the National Register or not. How many of y'all been to Thorn Crown Chapel? I always like ask, usually I'm the education coordinator, and I do usually have school age groups, and of course a lot of my 4th, 5th, even on into 10th and 11th graders have never been to Eureka Springs. And I like to mention this because once I give this presentation, they all want to go to the Crescent Hotel and Eureka Springs. So I like to point out that, hey, while you're there, if you do go, please make a short visit to Thorn Crown. Okay. So a bit of background. Whoops. Okay, folklore. Traditional stories or customs, sayings, other art forms that are preserved by a specific culture, and a lot of times they're passed down through word of mouth. A ghost story, essentially the same thing, except it incorporates that whole supernatural belief, that belief that there's a ghost involved in the plot. We're going to focus on 2 areas. We're going to focus on Hot Springs and Eureka Springs. Of course, does anyone know the Haunted Historic Hotel in Hot Springs? The Arlington, yeah. Okay. Now, I will say the first time I stayed at the Arlington, I was in junior high, or it might have been 10th grade, it might have been high school. I did not know that the Arlington was haunted. Did not know that until college, and I had a very good friend who was all into this, ghostly stuff, and so we had to go down there and check things out. But early Hot Springs is what we're going to focus on first. Native Americans were the first ones to use the hot springs. They were very aware of the medicinal, the healing properties of the springs. You have the Arkansas explorers Hunter and Dunbar, who showed up in the area, and for about 4 weeks they surveyed the land and its surroundings. Well, they did this in 1804. It did not take long for your first European settler to show up. Jean-Pierre Emmanuel Prudhomme, I believe I said that right, I might not have. He shows up in 1807, and he heard of the healing qualities, the healing properties of the springs. And that's exactly why he headed to the area. And this essentially is going to lead to the birth of a tourist destination. The powers that be, those people who were in charge, saw the economic potential that Hot Springs had. In 1820, your first hotel opens. It was really just kind of a log cabin with a bathtub for visitors. In 1832, a geologist commissioned by the government was sent down. His name was George Fanshawe. And he visited the area. Basically, he was there to substantiate, to kind of back up what Hunter and Dunbar had already said. And he said, yes, there are 3 wretched-looking log cabins. There's a little general store. The hot springs are here. They are not a flash in the pan. They're not going to be going away. They're here. And that's all the government needed to be able to designate Hot Springs as a federal reservation, and it became the nation's first national park. I did not know that, actually, until I was doing this presentation. And I went home and I asked my kids, and I was like, yay, Conway Schools, because yes, they did know that it was the first national park, but a lot of people were not aware of that. Okay, these 2 pictures right here I like to point out. I mean, not many years difference between these 2, and you can see how much improvement happened in that 20 years. Here you have the Hale-Bath House in 1854. Again, that, I don't know if you can tell. Don't knock anything off. Right here, this is basically just a plank, a board thrown across there. And all that mucky water. You know, you think of going to Hot Springs today and you're going to go have a spa day. This is not what you picture. But 20 years later, you see that there's more design, more planning in the design of laying out the streets and the buildings that are there. In 1862, Hot Springs was for a short time the Confederate state capital. And as early as the 1970s, like I said, the economic potential was very much present, and people knew what money could be made. And disputes over ownership and building rights were already just bubbling up along with the hot springs. And there are actually 2 acts of Congress were needed and a Supreme Court decision in order to settle some of these conflicts. In 1875, you have 2 important things happen. First off, the first Arlington Hotel is built. Does anyone know how many Arlingtons there have been total? Take a guess.
3.
That's right. There have been 3 total. 1875 also saw the Rock Island Railroad come in, which any of us know that in order for growth and expansion to happen, you've got to have supplies. You've got to have things to build it up. So this is an important part with the railroad coming in. Now in 1876, you have a fire that breaks out and it destroys a lot of the wood frame buildings in the city. It leaves about 1,000 people homeless. But actually Hot Springs kind of sees this as an opportunity. I mean, yes, it was a disaster, but it's an opportunity to replace a lot of those old bathhouses with these attractive Victorian buildings. They realize that with tourists want to be pleased. They want to have a nice place to lay their head. They want to have places to eat. They want to have pretty things to look at. So if you want these tourists to spend their money, they saw the opportunity to build these brand new buildings. I like this card. I've been in hot water every day since I came to Hot Springs. And by the 80s, Hot Springs is a very popular resort town. So now we're going to focus on the Arlington itself. Okay, the first Arlington Hotel is built in 1875, and it's actually built across the street from where the current Arlington is today. It was the only hotel found on federal reservation land. It was partly owned by Samuel Fordyce and 2 other men. If you recognize the name Fordyce, yes, it's the same Fordyce that Fordyce, Arkansas is named after. The Arlington could house about 200 guests. It included a bathhouse and dining rooms. And it was the largest hotel in the state. And I'll tell you briefly about the Arlington Gang Shootout. There's a local newspaper writer named Charles Matthews who, for some reason, I've done a little digging into this, and I do not know exactly why he was printing these falsehoods, but he was saying that there was actually no hot springs on the Arlington property. This was not true. But Fordyce understood that this could hurt, his pocketbook. If people were coming to the area to experience the hot springs, they wanted to be, close to a bathhouse. Well, if the Arlington didn't have one, according to Matthews and his reports, they might not stay there. So Fordyce ends up confronting Mr. Matthews on the street. A shootout erupts between the 2 men, and Matthews was killed. So let this be a lesson to you. Do not lie. Fordyce, you think, is always surprised by my 5th and 6th graders. They're thinking, oh, he definitely went to jail. I don't know what to tell you. It's pretty, Wild West, I guess, because Samuel Fordyce was asked to pay a fine, and he went on about his business. Okay, the second Arlington Hotel. The first Arlington, there's actually nothing wrong with it except that it wasn't modern enough. It didn't have all the luxury, all the amenities of some of the new hotels that have been built. It didn't have the same ones. So they demolished it in 1893 in order to compete with the Majestic, the Park, and the Eastman. You can see from some of these pictures here some of the amenities that they focused on. You've got the grand staircase, you've got the archways, the opulent architecture, the large smoking porches, verandas that went around the hotel. Unfortunately, it does not last very long. Within 30 years, the second Arlington burned. Smoke was detected on the evening of April 5th, 1923, and it was actually detected by the guests of the hotel. And they informed the staff, and the staff, of course, tells them they need to exit the premises, they need to evacuate. But they're very unconcerned with the fire. And I don't know if this is because it's such a luxury hotel and they think automatically, oh, it'll be taken care of, it's going to be fine. But a lot of them continue to smoke or even retire to their rooms, making the situation even more dangerous. And they actually, a lot of guests had to be rescued from their rooms. Surprisingly, though, none of the guests actually were killed in the fire. There was one fireman who was killed. His name was George Ford. He was the father to 7. So that brings us to the third Arlington, the current Arlington Hotel. It opened in 1924, November of 1924. It's built, it's the current one today, but it was built across the street from the original 2, or from the first 2. And it was designed by George Mann, who also designed the Arkansas State Capitol. Now, right around this time, I'm sure everyone here knows that Prohibition's going on. Prohibition wasn't just the sale of liquor; it was the transportation, the making of it, the consumption of it. All of it was illegal. And of course, if it's illegal, no one's going to take part in it, right? Not so much. And this is where we see the integration of hot springs and organized crime. I just noticed that I have got 2 pictures here of Bugsy. I think this one's Siegel. This is Lucky Luciano. But illegal gambling is common in Hot Springs from the 1860s to the 1960s. In the 20s, with the illegal casinos that are being ran, they actually start incorporating, the alcohol. Gambling and alcohol kind of go hand in hand. So it's during this time that Hot Springs becomes a second home for many notorious organized crime figures. Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, Bugsy, Meyer Lansky. And we are going to focus on Capone. Al Capone makes his millions controlling the illegal liquor sales in Chicago during Prohibition. However, a lot of people don't know that he vacationed in Hot Springs. Many people have made the comparison that Hot Springs was a lot like Chicago, except that he didn't have the conflicts with the other people who might have been running other speakeasies or bringing in other illegal alcohol. Oddly enough, he got along with everyone in Hot Springs. The people of Hot Springs kind of realized that he was bringing in revenue. There was no one he had to beat up or kill. And he actually got along, and there was no conflict with him being there. I have heard, and actually it was a gentleman who works at the Mobster Museum there in Hot Springs, who told me that at the time they thought a lot of Capone and a lot of other organized crime figures thought the hot springs would cure STDs. So it was one of those things where they were coming down here with their large group of people, and they were, taking the time to bathe in the springs, hoping, I guess, to clear up some of their problems. Okay, Al Capone and the Arlington. Like I said, he doesn't live here, but he does vacation here a lot. He does not own a home. He liked the hotel life, and he would stay. His suite of choice was Suite 443. Now, he had a bird's eye view of the street there in front of the Arlington and the Southern Club, which was right across the street, and the Hoppin' Club. It was the most popular club in Hot Springs. So it makes sense that he would want that bird's eye view so he could see if any law enforcement or if there was any raids or anything's fixing to happen. He would often rent out the entire 4th floor for him and his entourage. And this is going to bring us to some of our ghost stories at the Arlington. Okay, on the 4th floor, there is a bellman named Henry Tweedle. He died. He was around during Capone's time. He died shortly thereafter. Capone did not have him killed. He has been seen, though, relatively recently in his bellman's uniform. He's got on the little red top hat and the little red jacket. and he's looking very confused, and when people have walked up to ask if they can offer them any assistance, he disappears. Still to this day, and I've actually met a person who had this problem, the elevator goes to the 4th floor all on its own, and it stays there. They have brought in elevator operators, electricians, anyone who might be able to fix the problem with the elevator. They do not know why, but many times when it goes to the 4th floor, it will stay there, or even on its own, it will automatically travel to or go up to the 4th floor. The staff knows that if there's someone in the lobby wanting that elevator and it has not returned, come back down, they have to go walk up the stairs, get on the elevator, and manually override it and bring it back down. There's no rhyme or reason. Some people think that maybe Mr. Tweedle is still servicing Al Capone on the 4th floor. All right, other ghosts at the Arlington. Bartenders tell guests about bottles of wine that sometimes slide right off the bar. Guests have reported seeing apparitions of people in old-fashioned clothing walking down the hallway in the lobby. Several reports of poltergeist activity by former staff members. Now, poltergeist activity is going to be things like actual physical disturbances, things being moved, like chairs rolling across the dance floor. There was a report of one of the staff members, a young woman who she said she was unloading toilet paper and putting it up on shelves. And then all of a sudden she heard them all, get knocked off. Well, of course, this toilet paper wasn't a loud boom, but as soon as she looks up there, the last little bit of the toilet paper that she had just stocked that entire shelf was flying off. There was a report that I read about a gentleman who had been working at the Arlington. He was a bartender. He had been there for only a few weeks. And he did not know any of the stories beforehand. But upon hearing, once getting the job, he heard a lot of these stories and didn't believe them, of course. Well, one night, it was a late evening, and there was no, he said there wasn't very many people in the bar. But he was kind of cleaning up, and there was a bottle that there was up on the bar, and very slowly, but very, an intended pace, very intentionally, was moving about like this across the bar. Didn't go flying off, didn't bust on the floor or anything, kept going. Well, he thought, of course, it was some of his coworkers playing a gag on him. So he looked under the bar, he was looking for strings, for magnets, anything that would be moving it, and couldn't find anything. And then he realized that actually none of his coworkers were even in the area. They were all patrons. And he said as soon as he kind of realized that, he looked down at it, and then it just stopped. And there's no explaining it. His report was that he never liked to work alone again. Okay, now we're going to move on to Eureka Springs. How many of y'all stayed at the Crescent Hotel?